The stars stretched endlessly, a silent ocean of darkness where the echoes of forgotten wars still lingered. In this vast emptiness, the Revenant drifted like a ghost, its engines humming softly, a lone vessel in the abyss. Then, a sound, a crackling transmission, breaking through the quiet, a voice, clear, yet strained. "This is Elyra Valen, Princess of Orion Dominion. I am held captive by hostile forces. If anyone can hear me, please, help me. I will pay any price. But if you believe in something greater than survival, please." For a moment, silence returned. Kane Mercer leaned back in his pilot's chair, fingers hovering over the controls. He had heard distress calls before, desperate voices lost in the void, most of them traps. He knew better than to get involved. But something in her voice stopped him. He hesitated, then sighed. "This is Kane Mercer, independent operator. What's your location?" The answer would change everything. The cockpit of the Revenant was dim, bathed in the flickering glow of navigation screens. Outside the thick glass of the viewport, the Cassidian belt stretched into endless darkness, a graveyard of shattered ships and forgotten battles. Large asteroids drifted in silence, their jagged edges reflecting faint starlight. The remnants of old warships floated like broken bones in a void where no law, no order, no mercy existed. Kane Mercer sat in the pilot's chair, boots propped against the console, fingers lazily drumming on his worn leather jacket. His ship hummed softly around him, a steady rhythm in the quiet void. He was alone, just the way he preferred it. Then, a sound broke the silence. A sharp, static-filled distress signal crackled through the ship's speakers. The voice that followed was clear but strained, a whisper of desperation wrapped in defiance. "This is Elyra Valen, Princess of Orion Dominion. I am held captive by hostile forces. If anyone can hear me, please, help me. I will pay any price. But if you believe in something greater than survival, please." Kane sat up, his sharp eyes narrowing. Orion Dominion. That name hadn't been spoken in years, not since the war that turned an empire into dust. Not since General Vex took control of its ruins, crushing what remained under his iron fist. Kane ran a hand through his unkempt dark hair, exhaling slowly. He had heard countless distress signals in his time. Most were traps, lures to draw in fools with soft hearts. He wasn't one of them. He had spent too many years seeing the galaxy for what it was, a place where only the strong and the ruthless survived. Yet, something in her voice held him still. It wasn't just fear, there was something else. "This is Kane Mercer, independent operator," he finally said, his voice low and even. "What's your location?" There was silence, just a heartbeat too long, before the response came. "Mercer? A rogue mercenary answering a princess's call for help? Hard to believe." Kane smirked. "I'm just curious. What's in it for me?" Another pause. Then her voice returned, softer, yet unyielding. "I have nothing left to lose. And maybe you don't either." A muscle in Kane's jaw tightened. Damn it. He reached for the console, fingers hovering over the switch that would cut the signal. The smart choice, the safe choice. But instead, he locked onto the coordinates. The Revenant shuddered as its engines roared to life, pushing forward into the unknown. The planet Dravos loomed ahead, a dying world cloaked in ash and shadow. It had once been a mining colony, but now it was nothing more than a wasteland of rusted structures and broken machines, claimed by the warlord Vex and his army of exiles. Kane descended through thick, storm-ridden clouds, his ship weaving past floating debris and half-destroyed satellite towers. He didn't expect a welcome party, and sure enough, the air crackled with the distant hum of planetary defense turrets, scanning the skies for intruders. He cut the engines, letting the Revenant drift, undetectable, before engaging the cloaking system. He had no plan, no strategy, only his instincts and a dangerous amount of confidence. Kane dropped silently onto the surface, his boots sinking slightly into the damp, cracked ground. The air was thick with the stench of oil and burning metal. Ahead, the fortress loomed, a massive compound of rusted steel and reinforced barriers, its flickering red lights casting eerie shadows across the wasteland. Inside, the sounds of cruelty echoed in the corridors. Laughter, heavy footsteps, and the occasional pained whisper of a prisoner too weak to cry out. Kane moved like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, slipping through gaps between broken walls. He passed rows of prison cells, their metal bars bent and rusted. Orion prisoners huddled in corners, their faces hollow, their eyes lost. The air was suffocating, thick with despair and the scent of blood. Then, he saw her. Princess Elyra Valen. She stood behind the cold steel of her cell, her presence an eerie contrast to the filth around her. Her silver hair, though tangled, still held a ghostly shimmer in the dim light. Her skin, a soft shade of violet, glowed faintly, almost unearthly. But it was her eyes that caught him, piercing, unwavering, filled with quiet defiance. She wasn't just waiting for rescue. She was ready to fight. She stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with exhaustion. "I expected a noble warrior," Kane smirked. "And I expected a princess locked in a tower. Guess we're both disappointed." She arched an eyebrow. "You don't look like the kind of man who rescues damsels in distress." "I'm not," Kane said simply, before raising his blaster. The guard standing near her cell dropped before he even had time to scream. "Move!" Kane ordered, cutting through the lock with a single precise shot. Elyra didn't hesitate. She stepped over the unconscious body and met his gaze. "Let's get out of here." The moment they stepped into the corridor, alarms screeched like dying machines, bathing the fortress in blinding red light. A deep, mechanical voice thundered through the speakers. "Intruder detected. All units, intercept." Kane muttered a curse. "Looks like we overstayed our welcome." Blaster fire erupted from both sides, bolts of searing red energy slicing through the darkness. Kane shoved Elyra behind a stack of rusted crates, returning fire with deadly precision. The fortress shook as heavy footsteps pounded toward them. More guards, armored and armed, blocking their path to freedom. Elyra's hands flickered with energy, her breath ragged as she summoned the last remnants of her strength. "Can you run?" Kane asked, eyes scanning the chaos. "Can you shoot?" Elyra shot back. Kane grinned despite the gunfire ripping through the air. "Then let's go." They moved as one, darting through the maze of metal corridors, dodging fire, slipping between blasts. Finally, a single docking bay stood between them and escape, and at its center, Kane's ship, the Revenant, stood waiting like a beast ready to pounce. A final wave of guards stormed the hangar. Too many. Elyra turned to him. "Do you have a plan?" "Plans are overrated," Kane said, grabbing her hand and pulling her into a sprint. The two dove for the ship, just as a blast struck the ground behind them, sending a shockwave of fire and debris. Kane hit the controls, and the ship's engines roared like a caged animal unleashed. As the Revenant shot into the sky, bullets and explosions trailing behind them, Kane let out a sharp breath. "Well, that was fun." Elyra, bruised but unbroken, leaned against the wall, her silver eyes still burning. "We're not done yet." Kane exhaled, gripping the controls as the void of space stretched endlessly ahead. "Yeah, I figured." The ship drifted through the cold emptiness of space, the planet Dravos shrinking into a distant shadow behind them. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, their light silent and unchanging, indifferent to the chaos left behind. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the Revenant's engines was the only sound, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the void. Kane sat at the controls, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the console, his sharp eyes scanning the navigation data. His body was still tense from the escape, his mind alert. Behind him, Elyra stood, her gaze fixed on the vastness of space beyond the viewport. Her silver hair reflected the dim light from the ship's controls, giving her an almost spectral appearance. She looked calm, but Kane could see the tightness in her posture, the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Something was weighing on her. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "Vex is after more than just power. He's looking for an artifact, an Orion remnant." Kane glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "That's supposed to mean something to me?" Elyra turned, her violet eyes locking onto his. It should. The Orion remnant is not just a relic of the past. It holds knowledge, energy, technology powerful enough to either rebuild my civilization or destroy whatever is left of it. Kane exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. He had heard this kind of story before. Legends of lost artifacts, promises of salvation. Hope twisted into war. Let me guess, he said, his voice edged with skepticism. It's hidden in some ancient ruin that no one has been able to find. But you, of all people, just happen to know where it is? Elyra didn't flinch. I don't know exactly where it is, but I know where to start looking. Zion Prime. The name sent a chill through Kane. A dead world, a graveyard of forgotten wars. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you want to go to a planet where no one returns, to search for a weapon that might not even exist, while Vex is already on the hunt? Elyra nodded. Yes. Kane let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. I've seen too many people chase ghosts like this. They all end up in the same place, a nameless grave in some forsaken part of the galaxy. Elyra stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then why did you answer my call? Kane stared at her, his jaw tightening. He didn't have an answer. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unspoken. Elyra turned away, her gaze returning to the stars. You don't have to believe in it, Kane. But I do. And I'm going to find it. With or without you. Kane sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He hated getting involved in things like this. Survival was simple. Caring was complicated. But something about this woman, her unwavering resolve, the fire in her eyes, made it impossible to walk away. Finally, he set the coordinates for Zion Prime. Horizon Haven was a floating city of shadows and smoke. A station built from wreckage and forgotten warships, it drifted in the outskirts of the galaxy, far from the reach of any authority. Here, there were no rules, no loyalties, only deals and survival. As the Revenant docked, the ship's systems scanned the station's atmosphere. Low oxygen, high radiation, dangerous life signs detected. Kane smirked. Feels like home. Elyra, standing beside him, frowned. This place is a den of thieves and killers. Exactly. Which means no one asks questions. The docking bay was dimly lit, the metal walls rusted and scarred. Steam hissed from broken vents, casting ghostly wisps into the stale air. The scent of fuel, sweat, and desperation clung to everything. The moment they stepped out, eyes turned toward them. Smugglers, bounty hunters, mercenaries, people who lived on the edge of the law, just like Kane. Elyra walked with confidence, but Kane could see the tension in her movements. She wasn't used to places like this. Stay close, he muttered, and don't trust anyone. They navigated through a maze of neon-lit alleys and smoke-filled corridors, past bars where cybernetic-enhanced brutes brawled over spilled drinks, past traders selling weapons and black-market technology. Their destination was a rundown cantina on the lower levels, a place where the air was thick with the smell of burning circuits and spilled liquor. At the far end of the room, a man sat alone in a corner booth. Talon Graves. Once, he had been an elite agent of the Orion Dominion, before everything collapsed. Now, he was a ghost of his former self, a man living in the wreckage of a world that no longer existed. Kane and Elyra approached. Talon didn't look up. He was cleaning a knife, the blade catching the dim light like a predator's tooth. Kane slid into the booth across from him, Elyra sitting beside him. Talon finally lifted his gaze, his eyes scanning Elyra with sharp calculation. Well, well, he murmured. A princess in a place like this. Either the galaxy has gone mad, or you have. Elyra met his gaze, unwavering. I need your help. Talon smirked, leaning back in his seat. That's funny. The last time Orion royalty needed my help, they left me to die. Kane sighed. Can we skip the part where you pretend you're not interested and get to the part where you tell us what we need to know? Talon chuckled, shaking his head. You always did have a way with words, Mercer. His eyes flickered back to Elyra. What do you want? Zion Prime, Elyra said simply. The Orion Vault. The smirk vanished from Talon's face. His fingers tightened around the knife. For the first time, there was something like fear in his expression. You don't want to go there, he said. That place is cursed. Elyra's voice was steady. Vex is looking for the Orion remnant. If we don't get there first, everything that's left of my people will be lost forever. Talon studied her for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. You're either brave or stupid. Maybe both. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I can get you there. But if we do this, you need to understand. No one who goes to Zion Prime comes back the same. Kane exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Great. Just what I wanted to hear. Talon slid a small data chip across the table. Coordinates, flight paths, everything you need to get past the automated defenses. Elyra took it, nodding. Thank you. Talon studied her again, as if trying to see something beyond the title of princess. Just remember, he said, some things are buried for a reason. As they stood to leave, Kane glanced at Elyra. You sure about this? She met his gaze, her violet eyes burning with determination. I have to be. Outside, the neon lights of Horizon Haven flickered like dying stars, casting long shadows across the metal walkways. The air felt heavier now, filled with the weight of something unseen, something waiting. Ahead, Zion Prime loomed, a world of secrets long forgotten, but never truly lost. The ship cut through the void of space, the endless black stretching in every direction. Ahead, Zion Prime loomed like a broken world, its surface cracked and lifeless, wrapped in an eternal storm of dust and lightning. The planet was old, ancient scars of forgotten wars carved deep into its barren lands. As the Revenant descended through the thick clouds, waves of energy flickered through the atmosphere, casting eerie green and blue pulses across the dark sky. Inside the cockpit, Kane tightened his grip on the controls, his sharp eyes scanning the surface below. Something was wrong. Then, he saw it. A fleet. Ships covered the ruins like a metal plague, dark vessels bearing the mark of General Vex. Damn it, Kane muttered. He got here first. Elyra leaned forward, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light of the control panels. Her expression remained calm, but her fingers tightened into fists at her sides. We can still get inside, she said, but I need time to activate the gate. Kane's gaze flicked to her. Let me guess. You need me to play distraction? Elyra met his eyes, her voice steady. If Vex stops me from opening that vault, everything will be lost. Kane sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Fine. But if I die, I'm haunting you. She gave him a small, unreadable smile. Noted. The ruins of Zion Prime stretched beneath them, massive stone structures rising from the sand, worn down by time and war. In the center stood a massive gate, covered in glowing symbols that pulsed faintly with old energy. Kane set the ship down behind a crumbling ridge, shielding it from view. The moment the hatch opened, heat slammed into them like a wall, the air thick with dust and the scent of ozone. Above them, storm clouds crackled with energy, flashing against the dark sky. Elyra moved quickly, her hands brushing over the stone gate as she began to activate the ancient mechanism. The symbols lit up beneath her touch, responding to something deep in her bloodline. Kane turned, pulling his blaster free. His instincts screamed at him, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. And then, the shadows moved. Troops, dozens of them. Emerging from the wreckage, weapons raised, armor gleaming under the flickering light of the storm. At the center of them all stood General Vex, his piercing red eyes locked onto Kane, his expression calm, almost amused. Mercer, Vex said, his deep voice carrying through the wind. You should have taken your payment and left. Kane rolled his shoulders, keeping his blaster trained. Yeah, well, I have a bad habit of doing the wrong thing. Vex smirked. Kill him. The fight began. Inside the vault, a cold, ancient light flickered to life. Elyra stepped forward, her breath shallow as she took in the chamber around her. The walls were lined with massive crystalline structures, each one pulsing with a soft, ghostly glow. But at the center stood the Orion remnant. Not a weapon, a memory. She moved closer, her fingers trembling as she reached out. The moment she touched it, her mind was flooded with voices, thousands of them, whispering in a language older than time. Her people, their knowledge, their legacy, their final message to the last of their kind. And then, a shadow fell over her. She spun, her heart hammering. Vex stood in the doorway, his armor dark against the glow of the vault. "It belongs to me," he said, stepping forward. Elyra held her ground. "You don't understand what it is." Vex smiled, his red eyes gleaming with hunger. "I don't need to." He raised his hand. A wave of dark energy shot toward her. Elyra reacted on instinct. She lifted the Orion remnant, and the entire chamber exploded in light. Outside, Kane staggered back as a pulse of energy ripped through the ruins, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Vex's forces crumbled, their weapons sparking, their armor disintegrating under the sheer force. But Kane wasn't spared. The blast slammed into him, throwing him across the battlefield. He hit the ground hard, pain flaring through his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, his vision blurred. Then, hands on him, pulling him, holding him. Elyra. She dragged him from the ruins, her breath ragged, her hands stained with his blood. "You're not dying," she whispered. Kane choked out a laugh, his lips curling into a weak smirk. "If I die in a princess's arms, I guess there are worse ways to go." She pressed a hand to his wound, her silver eyes blazing. "Shut up and hold on." Then, darkness. The air was cold and still, the scent of metal and fuel thick around them. Kane opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the dim light of the Revenant's medbay. His body ached like hell, but he was alive. Elyra sat nearby, arms crossed, watching him. He let out a slow breath, his voice hoarse. "Did we win?" Elyra nodded. "Vex is gone. The vault collapsed. The Orion remnant is safe." Kane chuckled, wincing. "So what now? You rebuild your lost kingdom?" Elyra's gaze drifted to the stars beyond the viewport, her expression unreadable. "Orion isn't something I can rebuild overnight. But I'm not alone anymore." Kane studied her for a long moment, then exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Guess that means I'm sticking around." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought you didn't care about causes." Kane smirked. "I don't, but I care about you." A flicker of something soft, uncertain, and new passed through her expression. She didn't look away. Outside, the ship drifted through the quiet vastness of space. The war was over, but their story was just beginning. "So," Kane muttered, pushing himself up with a grimace. "Where to?" Elyra smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Anywhere," she said. "As long as it's not another collapsing vault." Kane laughed, shaking his head. And together, they disappeared into the stars. The war was over. The vault had collapsed, sealing its secrets within the ruins of Zion Prime. But the galaxy didn't stop turning. The scars of battle still lingered, the weight of the past pressing down on the survivors. Inside the Revenant, Kane Mercer sat in the pilot's chair, his wounds aching, but his mind sharp. Across from him, Elyra stood by the viewport, staring into the endless black beyond. "Vex is gone. The Orion remnant is safe. But rebuilding what was lost, that's going to take time." Kane smirked, shifting in his seat. "So, what now? You become a queen?" Elyra's gaze never wavered from the stars. "Orion isn't something I can rule alone. But I don't have to be alone anymore." Kane exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess that means I'm sticking around." She turned to face him, something unreadable in her expression. "I thought you didn't believe in causes." Kane shrugged. I don't. But I believe in you. The silence stretched between them, heavy, unspoken, charged with something neither of them could quite name. Then, Elyra allowed a small smile. Where to next, Mercer? Kane tapped a few buttons, the ship's engines rumbling to life. Anywhere. As long as it's not another collapsing vault. The ship shot forward, disappearing into the sea of stars. But the real question remained. Was this the end of their journey? Or was it only the beginning? Now it's your turn. What do you think happens next? Would you trust Kane Mercer? Can Elyra rebuild her lost kingdom? Or are there greater threats waiting in the shadows? Tell us your thoughts below. The galaxy is vast, and their story is far from over.